Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Tell me about the relationship the media has with the clubs, the coaches, the players. If you look at other sports, it tends to be quite a fractious relationship. Does the same apply to rugby?
Well, it has its ups and downs. I mean, I would say on the whole, in rugby, the relationship between the media and various stakeholders is broadly healthy. But like any relationship, you have flashpoints where a story might upset a club or a player. But if you were to compare rugby to, say, English football, it's chalk and cheese. Having worked in football as well, I know how hard it is to request just one player, even in the Championship, let alone the Premier League or an international. And only 3 journalists are allowed access to the mix zone, where you can speak to players after a match. And even then, players are under no obligation to sort of stop and talk. So that's a sort of what I would say where there's been a complete breakdown in trust. And I think the trust still exists in rugby. Players and coaches will speak to the press outside of designated media days, but increasingly more and more clubs are saying you can only speak to certain players at our media days. And at the weekend, Steve Diamond, the Sale Sharks director of rugby, refused to speak to the media after their team got hammered at Northampton. He sent out a bland generic release. So there's obviously room for improvement, yet it is, I would say, on the whole, broadly positive.
The other name that's been in the headlines recently has been that of Richard Cockerill, getting very defensive about Leicester and the sort of media coverage of whatever's been going on at Leicester. Do you have any comment to make about that and the way he's responded?
I think if you speak to most journalists in the written press, you'll find that they love Richard because he gives sensational quotes most of the time. They're never bland, they're always to the point. He never dodges the issue. But given Leicester's start to the season and the expectations at the club, more than I would say from the press, they're entitled to be criticised. And what he's done is chosen to sort of close ranks, to not allow players to speak to the press, to try and take it all on his own shoulders, which in some ways is quite admirable. And they did get a reaction against Harlequins.
Do you think the media has a bias towards London clubs?
I would say there's a natural tendency to report more on the clubs that you're based nearer. It stands to reason that, say, for me, who I'm based in southwest London, it's far easier for me to get to clubs like Harlequins, to London Irish, to Saracens, than it is to Newcastle. However, there are a number of national newspaper journalists who are based in the southwest, and therefore their local patch is around Gloucester, Bath, Exeter, and Chris Foy of the Daily Mail lives in Manchester. So there's always going to be a bias to an extent about which clubs you report on if they're close to you. However, I would say not all. It would be wrong to assume every single rugby journalist is based in London.
Bath, are they going to continue their great run, or are they going to suffer the effects of being so successful?
Yeah, they're the most interesting club in terms of the start they made to the season. Obviously, they had a hiccup against Wasps that was very unexpected at the weekend, but you've seen a number of necessarily their standout internationals, the sort of Carl Eastmans, the Jonathan Josephs, really start at a sensational pace. But the big question is, if they get called up, will the sort of second string, sort of Ollie Devoto and Gavin Henson, be able to come in and maintain that? And the second issue will be the arrival of Sam Burgess. Will it be a distraction when Saracens recruited Joel Tompkins, and obviously different calibre of player potentially, but they were very conscious to softly introduce him into Union, that he spent a year, 6-8 months maybe, just playing A-League games. He was playing for Hertfordshire in the Counties Championship Burgess won't have that. He will be expected to fit in straight away, and only one player, to my knowledge, in English rugby has ever done that, and that's Jason Robinson, who is arguably the greatest player of all time in both codes.
Which 3 players so far this season have stood out for you? They don't have to be English, by the way.
I've already mentioned Carl Eastman. I need to make a sort of disclaimer here. I'm probably the number one member of the Carl Eastman fan club.
Okay.
I thought he was sensational in the first test against New Zealand, and I thought he was also hung out to dry to an extent for the team's defensive failings in the third test. But the way he's bounced back this season has been incredible. He's got a skill set that I don't think any other 12, whether English or otherwise, has in the Premiership, with his footwork and his distribution. And for me, he's if Stuart Lancaster's picking on form alone, then he would be a shoo-in at 12. But there are other factors that Lancaster takes into consideration. Second player who's impressed me has been Henry Slade, who's another English centre, albeit he's come from playing almost exclusively at fly half to moving to outside centre, which most people would adjudge the hardest position to defend in Union, and so far he's been immaculate defensively, and he's brought that distribution game he has at fly half to outside centre, and to make that switch is incredibly difficult, but he's made it look very easy. Third player, I would go for another back. Shows where my sympathies lie. James Short at London Irish. Okay. He got let go by Saracens despite scoring the winning try in their only Premiership final win to date. And he was obviously behind some very, very good players there, but has come in and looked a real prospect, really dangerous, always looking for work. He's got that ability just to break the first tackle when he gets in possession, and he's scored some absolutely fabulous tries this season as well.
Do you think Chris Robshaw is the right man to continue to captain England?
I think his place seems to always be under pressure, but whenever he's backed into a corner, he somehow comes out fighting. Whenever his place is under the greatest pressure, he delivers in so many other areas, and until he is not performing at those sort of levels, then I think it'd be unfair to drop him as captain or as a player.
So do you therefore think Harlequins made the right decision when they replaced him as captain and put Joe Marler in his place? You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
No, it was such a bolt from the blue. It came 3 days after their pre-season media day, in which I spoke to Marler and Robshaw. I actually spoke to them about captaincy, and neither gave any indication that it was going to change. And it must be incredibly difficult for Robshaw, who has been captaining his country, has captained Quins for 3-4 years, to suddenly try and take a backseat role and just hand over the reins to Marler. I see why it was done, because no individual in the British sporting sphere will have more pressure on their shoulders than Chris Robshaw going into the World Cup next year, maybe barring Andy Murray at Wimbledon. However, whether it was the right thing to do it this season and whether Marler was the right replacement, I think that's more the biggest surprise of it all. Was it did go to Marler, who has never really struck anyone as captaincy material, but we obviously aren't party to what goes on inside the dressing room, and he's still got time to make fools of us all who are writing him off already.